Now let's take care of adding a loader to indicate when the list of recipes is loading. First, we'll start with the recipe list, and for that, to simulate the delay, let's copy the implementation of our backend server into ChatGPT and ask to add a little delay to every API call. Let's see what it comes up with. All right, little delay here as a function using a promise and using a wait statement, adding the delay here in every API call. All right, this looks good. Let's copy and update our implementation here. Just checking that nothing weird was changed by the AI, just a little delay. Now restart the server after updating the code and now refreshing the UI. And I think it loaded pretty quickly, so I'm going to make a delay a little bigger. And for that, I'll declare a little variable to contain the number of how long the delay I want to be for, let's do 2 seconds. And update all the occurrences of this function to use the variable instead of hard coding the number. There, now in all the places where we use the delay, now it'll use 2 seconds, restart the server, reload the UI, and now it's more clear how it takes a couple of seconds for the recipe list to load while showing nothing to the user. So obviously that's not the ideal user experience that we're trying to fix. We're going to add a loader to improve this. Now navigate to our list in Angular to implementation of the recipe list in Angular. And then let's ask AI to add a loader to that list. I can see it's using ngIf, and it shouldn't. It's supposed to use the newer notation with @if. So let's ask to refactor it. All right, now I see @if and @else. That's better. Overall, this looks fine. Let's try to copy it and replace what we got. I'm curious why the @for loop is highlighted here. This seems okay, so what it doesn't like about it? Okay, it didn't have let in here. So let's get rid of that. And the highlight disappears. Now look at the controller for our component to introduce the variable for loading. And look at this, we already have a boolean that indicates whether we're in a loading state or not for the recipes. So let's just reuse that. I don't remember why I put it in there and didn't use it until up now, but here we have it. When recipes load successfully, we turn it into false, or when we get an error, we also turn it to false from true. This reminds me of that. We should also add some error handling, maybe in the next video, to show an error from the API. But okay, I think this should just work. There's the loading indicator, but obviously it was more than 2 seconds and the list doesn't load. So let's see what's going on here. There are no errors in the console. In the network tab, let's refresh one more time. Here's the recipe list, comes with a little delay, and it's loaded, and the loader is still displayed. Look at the implementation one more time. Check the template, and okay, so it's supposed to be a reverted value here. If it's not loading, then show the list of recipes. If it is loading, show the loader. All right, there you go. Now, after 2 seconds of seeing the loader, we see the list. Perfect. All right, now we have the initial loader for the list of recipes. Now let's take a look at the experience when we add a recipe. Type in the name, little description, hit the recipe button, and in the background, the API call is happening, but you can't tell to submit the recipe. And then there's another API call that fetches the list of recipes in a refreshed way, but you also can't tell because nothing is indicating on the screen that all this loading is happening. So let's take care of the reloading state. After we add the recipe, we're refreshing the list and we need to indicate that. So I think all I need to do is to say that loading is in progress right here. Each time fetch recipes is called either on the initial component load or when we submit a new recipe. All right, reload the page, submit the recipe, hit add. Okay, and it does the same thing as we do on the initial load. It hides the entire list and shows the spinner. This is not what I want because it's not a good UX when you just hide the entire list just because you're adding one recipe. Let's see what Bootstrap has for indicating a reloading state like this. Maybe a progress bar, something on a... I don't think so. These look like I would need to set the percentage myself, like to animate it manually depending on the progress. I want something that would just spins around, not like a spinner, but the progress bar that would have animation. Let's ask ChatGPT here, what's the best way to indicate a reloading state? It gives a few examples here. Loading spinner, disabling the list, or popping little toast notification. And at the end, it suggests you might want to use a progress bar. So let's go with that. Here, create an animated progress bar element for me. All right, let's copy that. Paste in the template just somewhere where it will show and we can see it. All right, so that's not animating, it's the gray bar. Okay, checking the implementation here. I'm feeling kind of lazy to try to figure it out on my own. So I'll see what it takes to get the AI to work. I'll say it's not animated for some reason. Oh, and now it makes it clear that I have to set the progress property manually and like keep updating it, animate it or something. No, I don't want to control the progress myself. I just wanted to animate on its own, like material progress bar, for example. All right, now it added keyframes to CSS. So let's copy new implementation, including the CSS here. Refresh, and now it's just a solid green bar. Okay. Okay, ChatGPT, there's still no animation. Okay, now it looks like it added more CSS. Let's copy the new implementation one more time. HTML, CSS. Look at this. Now it's animating continuously. I think we could use that. Let's just make it less thick. Let's go with 2 pixels. There you go. I think that works. So let's take this element and position inside of the block that will only run after the initial load. That means we would never see the reloading bar on the initial page load. So let's put it right here. We'll introduce a new reloading property, and then in the controller declare the property here. Initial value is false. Don't show the loader initially. I mean the reloader. But here in the add recipe handler, right before initiating the refresh of the recipes, set reloading to true. And then in fetch recipes, once recipes arrive, set reloading to false to hide the reloading bar. Rename this property here, submit the recipe. Now it's still showing the initial spinner. That's because I need to get rid of this little addition I made at the beginning here. We don't need this loading true here. Okay, try again. Add the new recipe. There you go. Now that's an unobtrusive little loader indicator that still keeps the list, the original list, intact, but just telling us that there's some things going on, and then the new recipe shows up. Okay, the next loader to be added is for the add recipe button to indicate that there's an API call to submit the recipe, and we need to wait a little bit. So copy the implementation and into ChatGPT ask to add the loader to the submit button right here. Okay, let's see what it suggests. I think the only difference here is that it updated the submit button as expected by adding a little loader behind the if statement. I think we can make this work. Let's just rename the property from loading because we already have a loading property. Let's call it submit loading. Rename it here and here. And now introduce this new property in the controller with initial value false. And then let's use this property in the add recipe handler. So as soon as you click the button to add the recipe, flip this flag to true to indicate the loading state. And then once we receive the response, flip it to false, whether the response is a success or an error. Now look at this tiny little thing. Something is not working clearly. So let's see what's wrong in the template. Okay, it's using ngIf, for which we don't have the module. I think it's common module or something to include ngIfs. And that's why we were using the at notation for loops and other ifs. So let's rework it real quick to use at if notation. So here it'll be if not submit loading, then show the add recipe button. Otherwise, show the spinner. Okay, try to add the recipe. There it is, the spinner. Perfect. Now let's do the exact same thing for the delete recipe button. Paste the implementation here and just rework it. For the delete button, introduce the new property delete loading here, specifically for the delete button. Add it in the controller. Also, default value is false. And now use it in the delete button handler, where as soon as you press the button, we flip flag to true to say the submission is in progress, and then when we receive the response, flip it to false. Now let's give it a try. Now look at this, this is hilarious. All of the buttons share the same state for the reloading, so they all show the loader. Let's see how we can fix it. The way to do it would be to grab the implementation of individual recipe item and place it in its own component so it will have its own state. So let's generate recipe item component in the components folder using Angular CLI. Then open it here. And paste the implementation of the recipe item here. And then go back to the main component and grab the delete recipe handler, which is specific to the recipe item component now, and put it in there. Let's get rid of as many highlights as possible here. First, take the delete loading property and put it into the component. And then copy and paste the constructor that contains the HTTP client for making the API calls. Import it. Now here, fetch recipes method is not available because it's in the main component. So instead of doing that, we'll replace it with an output property to emit an event for the main component to listen to and then do the fetching. Now in the template, these highlights are for displaying the properties of the recipe object. So let's make sure we can provide this object to this component from the parent component by using the input property. Now to get rid of the highlights on the properties, let's set the type to any for now. All right, no more highlights. And let's make use of this new component. Add it here, where all the HTML used to be for each recipe item. And then pass the recipe in. Now let's see what happens. All right, it doesn't compile. The app doesn't compile. Here it says you need to import the newly created component. So to the main component, the imports property here, let's add it. Okay. Now the app compiles. So let's check it in the browser. All right, so each recipe is displayed, but it's showing a column instead of a grid. I think what we can do is go back to the implementation of the recipe, grab the column container and paste it here. Use it here in the parent module, like this. Delete this remaining div. Refreshing the app. All right, back to grid, perfect. Now let's try the delete button. All right, now only the appropriate button spins. Perfect. But the list doesn't refresh after deleting it. For that, we need to listen for the deleted event from the parent component here and trigger the refresh. Let's give it a try. Deleting. And it disappears, but it doesn't show the reloading state. So here's what we can do. Let's declare a new method here, which will be the handler for the deleted event. And in here, first, we'll put the flag on for reloading state. And only then trigger the refresh of the recipes. And then here, let's use this new handler. And then the app. Delete the recipe. See the reloading state. And the deleted recipe disappears. Perfect.